Hey, how's it going? My name's Mike Squires, and this is the Guitarist podcast, episode number 233. And my guest, Richard Shaw, former guitar player for Cradle of Filth. He's also recently done a tour with King 810 over in the UK. I just was introduced to King 810 through Richard, actually. And brutal riffs and they're from Flint, and they're pretty gnarly. Anyway, they're not in the podcast. Richard is. Maybe I get David on the podcast. That'd be great. I've been to Flint. It's gnarly. It's not bullshit. It's not a bullshit place. Richard is incredible. A multifaceted guitar player, insanely talented, music educator, published music educational writer. And currently looking to book up the rest of his year, and I guess probably into the new year. He does guitar instruction online and in person. No matter where you are in the world, if you've got the flexibility to work, he's in the UK, so you're going to have to work with that time zone. I can't imagine he's going to want to get up at 3:30 in the morning and teach you if you're in Australia. But what do I know? Do go follow him. Richard Shaw, Guitarist. I had a hell of a good time talking with Richard. He's so good. We've been trying to plan a Guitarist video, and I'm trying to get back to doing the videos and the music performances in person with people like I did in the beginning. Now that the quarantine is over, and it's tricky. It's tricky getting back to it. It's hard, but we really want to do a Frank Zappa song, and I would be so into it. Yeah. If you want a guitar instructor, someone to teach you theory, guitar technique, you can do much, much worse. Get a hold of Richard. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. I really had a great time. If you are enjoying the Couch Riffs podcast, please support Couch Riffs at Patreon. Patreon.com/couchriffs. It's what makes this happen. It's what will eventually allow me to get back to doing the in-person live music performances. I have a bunch of ideas about what to do with that and how to make it happen and how to make it cool and how to make, more interesting content for you to enjoy. But it costs money. It's really that simple. So if you would support Guitarist, it would mean a lot to me, and hopefully I wouldn't let you down. I wouldn't disappoint you. I don't want to disappoint myself. I would like to thank everyone who already supports over there. I'd also like to thank Variety Coffee Roasters, our wonderful supporter. I drink I'm leaving on tour tomorrow, but I drink Variety Coffee every day when I'm home. That's a science fact. And that I can't give a product a higher endorsement than using it myself. Every single day. I wake up, I make a Chemex, I take a cup of coffee up to my wife, and then I enjoy mine downstairs while I make my online Scrabble moves. That's how I start every day, unless I have a really early work start. But Variety Coffee Roasters out of Brooklyn, New York. Check them out, varietycoffeeroasters.com on the internet, at Variety Coffee Roasters on Instagram. Give them a follow. Why don't you go order yourself some single origin Ethiopian coffee? That's what I drink every morning. I fucking love it. They're great. They kick ass. You kick ass. Drink Variety Coffee and have a kick ass day. We're going to get into the conversation now. Like I said, I hope you enjoy this. And don't forget the golden rule. Treat people the way you want to be treated. Man, if we all went around treating people like that, imagine how fucking remarkably pleasant everyone would be. About the various things behind you.
Yes, plenty of binders full of tabs from Total Guitar and Guitar World, about 25 years worth. Super organized when it comes to my tabs as a guitar teacher. It's like, well, instead of me tabbing it out, I've got Guitar World and Total Guitar to help me out there.
I learned from Guitar World and Guitar for the Practicing Musician, which is not around anymore, in the 80s. And I just sort of took for granted that everything in those tabs was absolutely perfect. And I think not everything was.
Yeah, it was kind of weird. I look back at it now, like when I was a kid, those things were gospel. That's how I learned everything. And now, over the years of being a musician and a guitar teacher, you kind of realize they were transcribed by people who were very, very good, but they're also human. So they did make mistakes every now and again. There's been even some crazy actual official tab books that I've bought where you go, this is horrifically wrong. But over the years, my ear got better, and I was like, well, that doesn't sound right. Maybe I'll tweak it so it sounds good to me. Even if I'm not 100% accurate, it sounds better to me than what was in the tab books. So some of them were really, really good. Weirdly enough, I was teaching Ziggy Stardust to a student yesterday, and I got the tab. I was like, no, we're all good. Sent the tab over, and then I triple-checked it. I was like, there's some parts that are really wrong. Even the wrong chords. I was like, this sucks. I'm going to have to redo the entire tab. So yeah, that was interesting. Such a famous and not ridiculously difficult song as Ziggy Stardust was actually transcribed incorrectly. But, we'll have our off days.
What song?
There could have been a deadline where they're like, quick, I think it's this.
Right.
Quick.
Do you use
I use Guitar Pro 8. I've just upgraded to 8.
Oh, rad. It's so good, man. I've been using Guitar Pro for 10 years, and I had to brush up on notation, but it came back to me pretty quick, and I made tab for like some of my own songs, and it was like, oh wow, you can play it back and check your work, and it's like, that's right.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
This is an ad for Guitar Pro. Thank you, Guitar Pro.
I really like it. I wish, thank you, Guitar Pro. I think it's brilliant in the sense that I never really got the whole people use Guitar Pro to write thing.
Right.
I still don't do that. I know a lot of bands who are like, I write it on Guitar Pro, then figure out how to play it later. And I'm like, well, what if you can't? Like, what if you've made it? Like, I know some bands who do that, and some of my students' bands do that. And I'm like, okay, I've tried that, and that really doesn't work for me, because you end up doing things that are kind of impractical, where you go, that sounds great when MIDI's played back to you, but you end up playing things that are way out of your comfort zone. You go, this sounds great. Now I'm going to learn how to play it. And in my experience, a lot of those bands never really learn how to play it. They end up going into the studio going, okay, I've written it in Guitar Pro. Then I go into the studio and we can do a million takes and chop and change. And then when we come to do it live, they never end up playing those songs live unless they're really, really, really good. And I suppose it depends on the genre of music as well, but I've never used Guitar Pro to really write. I think I use it more like I write the idea, and then if I know I'm going to forget it, I'll quickly transcribe that particular part or whatever. But usually it's when the song's done and I have the intention to teach with the tab or, usually teaching side of things. Like when I did the King 810 tour, it was just one of those things where if I'm ever needed again, I'm going to be very, very happy with my past self that I transcribed the entire set list.
You did?
Just in case they asked me back. Yeah, so that's something I started doing. Weirdly enough, Guitar Pro became this weird obsession during lockdown. When I was right, I'm going to finally learn how to use Guitar Pro, especially all my guitar lessons had to happen online. And I was like, well, okay, now instead of me writing some handwritten tab or sending them the tabs from Guitar World, Total Guitar, whatever, I really should learn how to do this properly, and then I can just email it to them. So I finally had the time to just sit down and learn how to use Guitar Pro properly, all of its features and everything. And it was a godsend. It was brilliant. And after that, I became this transcribing machine. Sorry?
Are you keying in notes, or are you using a MIDI controller or a MIDI pickup or something? I tried that for a minute and it didn't work.
No, I just type it all in.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how to do that, to be honest with you. I just I just type in the tab and then change the notation above, and that's the way I do it. I always wonder how people do it who don't know how notation works, because that's really weird. Like over rhythms and stuff, and you're subdividing the beats. I'm like, how do people do this? Do they just do it through sheer trial and error, or? Because I'm lucky I know the notation and things, but I always wonder how people do it so quickly when they don't know how notation works.
Probably through listening back and fudging it over. It isn't famously, didn't Frank Zappa say he didn't know anything about music, and then he started putting notes on the paper because he thought it looked incredibly beautiful, and then got some
I think
musicians to
so,
play
but
it.
if I remember correctly, he went. Yeah, I think he. If I remember correctly, he went to this weird thing called the library, which a lot of my students have never heard of. A library, I'm sure. The younger ones, they're like, "What? You used to get paper books?"
Right.
And like, yeah, that's how a lot of people learn their music theory, was like
Where
going
do
to
they
the
keep the
library and going, "I need
memes?
to know a bit about this music thing." Exactly. Like you mean it's not in the cloud? That seems like such a waste of tree. Like, but no, I think that's the way Zappa did it. If I remember correctly, he was like, okay, I want to know how to do this. I'm essentially going to teach myself how to do it. I went to music school and all that kind of stuff, so like we were kind of forced to sight read and learn notation. But when it came to putting it on Guitar Pro, it was like, okay, here's the tab. I'll write in the actual fingerings, and then I'll just go in and adjust the rhythm as I
Right.
go. But yeah, like, I agree with you. I think a lot of people, thanks to the playback button, it's like, well, that note's a bit quicker. Let me try this one. That one's a little bit slower.
Right.
Let me try that one. Oh, it's still not right. And it's almost trial and error. And they kind of get to know it through Guitar Pro, which is also pretty cool.
It's it's interesting to me, as I don't know what it's like in the UK, but here school music programs have been diminishing for years. And so learning how to read music on paper, or music on an iPad or whatever, is becoming, it's like Greek. Not that many kids are doing it. Used to be
Yeah,
not a requirement, but very encouraged here.
yeah. It's we have like music classes in our school system, but it's not an essential thing. Like your first kind of 3 years, usually in what we call secondary school, you tend to do music as just like maybe 1 or 2 lessons a week or whatever like that. Then you get the option to study it further, which
Yeah.
granted a lot of people don't. I was very lucky in the sense that that was very much a thing. And when I was at school, there was all kinds of extracurricular music stuff going on. But I know my school was quite fortunate in that sense that we had really passionate music teachers who instilled that into the people who wanted to become musicians. It was like kind of a no-brainer to study music further instead of just something you did after school for fun. So, but I know it's not the same in every school in the UK, and I think it is getting to that point where there's such an emphasis on maths, English, and science, rightly so, but at the expense of other things where kids who probably aren't excelling at maths, English, and science, but they're great at music, kind of feel like, I don't know, they're not good enough or whatever to compete in
Well, it's
society because they're really good at something that's kind of not the norm. But maybe that's been the way it's always been, but it seems to be more and more of a thing I've noticed in the UK. Not as many like extracurricular activities that are music based that the school actually provides. Even students of mine are really struggling to get in bands because they're struggling to find other people who are into music as passionate
right.
as they are. Because it's just not encouraged as much as it was. I don't know.
I know it's kind of a blanket statement, but also, kids who are creative in any form often are not good at the more like clinical sort of learning. They're not great at science or math. I sucked at math, but writing, I loved, literature and writing. Math, forget it. I did the
Mm.
minimum in school, and I don't think that I'm that's an unusual thing.
No, this is the thing. Like through years now of being a guitar teacher, and there was a couple of years where I was teaching in like music colleges. So a lot of kids would come out of school going, "Well, music's my thing. I wasn't very good at everything else," and you quickly realize it's like they kind of needed this. Like they needed to feel like they were good at something. So you know,
Yeah, of
thank
course.
the music lords that there was some kind of outlet for them, local to them. But it's amazing how many of these places are starting to either close down or they're just not getting the numbers that they used to have. I had this conversation with a producer friend of mine who also lectures at these kind of music colleges, and he was worried about his future as a production lecturer because he was thinking like the numbers aren't coming in, and I think it's genuinely because at the foundation level, it's not kind of encouraged like it used to be. It's like maths, English, and science. Like get a
Right.
steady career that uses these things, and I think there's a lot of kids who just constantly feel frustrated. So I don't know if it's always been the case, and I was just really really lucky at the school that I was at that it was encouraged. But I was lucky in the sense that I think I was a bit of an all rounder until guitar really took over when I was like 16 or whatever. I was like, I loved playing guitar, but when I got to 16, I was like, okay, I'm going to make guitar a career, and the rest of my studies went downhill. But music was going up.
Right.
So, and then when I was 18, I went to a music school, and then it was just like, cool, I can just play guitar all day, every day for 3 years while I grab my degree. This is the greatest thing ever, you know? And, but I was lucky. I was encouraged at a young age.
Was guitar your first instrument, or did you play an instrument in the school ensemble?
Guitar, still to this day, is pretty much my only instrument. It was just one of those things where I gravitated to it naturally. When I was like really young, we had a guitar, but I just kind of went dong 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 with my thumb on it, not really knowing what would
Yeah.
happen. Just going, oh, that's cool. I'm a cool kid. I play guitar, yay! But it didn't really do anything. And then when I was 11, I was begging my mum and dad for a guitar when I was 11, thanks to I was always a big Queen fan and Beatles and stuff like that. But then I got into Metallica when I was like 11 years old, like a lot of kids. And then it was like, now I really want to play guitar. Guitar is now very cool. Instead of just something that looks cool, it's like, now I really, really want to do that. And
Right.
I think like getting into that, like I was very lucky in the sense I treated guitar as like a very serious thing, but it was super fun. Every time I just got that little bit better, I was like, cool, I want to learn the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. So even though I dabble in bass and at school I dabbled in drums, it was always guitar was the serious instrument, really.
Did it come quickly to you, or was it something that you had to labor over? I know learning guitar, like when you first pick it up, there's the mechanical part, there's the physical part. Your fingers hurt. There's a lot of things to overcome, and then you hit that sort of terminal velocity, and you're like, okay, I understand how this machine works. How quickly did that part? Did you wrap your head around that part, and did you start to find yourself consuming learning songs and how notes related to one another?
Yeah, that's a really good question because it's so long ago now that I don't remember specifics, but I do remember my first actual lesson. Whereas, like, here you go, here are three chords, like A, D, and E. And I was having lessons with my older brother at the time as well. He started playing bass, and he
Yeah.
always wanted to play bass. It wasn't like he was like a guitar player who got lazy and just went, I'll be a bass player. We need a bass player in the band. He always wanted to play bass. Ironically, he can now play guitar as well, but he was a bass player first.
Yeah.
So the guitar teacher was really, really good. He taught us both at the same time, and he was just like, okay, bass player, here are your A, D, and E notes.
Right.
Cool, you practice those. Rich, here's an A chord. cool, strum these amount of strings, cool. And I'll go back to the bass player, see how he's getting on. Right, how you doing with that A chord? Right, here's the D chord. Right, now can you change from one to the other? I'll go back to him. Now can you do it with 2 fingers? Then I'll go back to Rich. Here's an E chord. Like, now practice those 3 chords. And it was really good. And he did that for years. And I think I was very, very lucky in the sense that and I think this is weird for a lot of people when I talk about this. I was playing technically in a band from day one because my brother was playing a bass line for my chord changes. Right. I was providing chords for his bass lines. So I think we got it from day one, where it's like, even if you get the hard parts where we're like, I'm really struggling changing from A to D or whatever, you could hear the almost instant reward of how good it sounds playing with someone else and how good it feels. So yes, I had my difficult moments, but I think I was lucky in the sense that I did pick it up fairly quickly because there was almost that instant reward of playing with somebody else. If it was just me left to my own devices, maybe I would have found it harder and maybe not put the time in. But I just thought it sounded really cool when there was a guitar and bass together.
Did you guys go on to have an actual band together, like playing with a drummer and?
Yeah, we were in a band called NG26 for the longest time, which is
what is that?
A strange name, I know, but we were actually called Eclipse, doing Oasis and Robbie Williams covers. Weirdly enough, my brother had joined that band about a year before I did. Their guitar player left, and then I joined. So I was rhythm guitar. They had a lead guitar player. I just learned bar chords when my brother was like my little brother plays guitar. I was just trying to get my hands around bar chords, and now all of a sudden it's like, we've got a gig in 6 weeks. I was like, I've got to learn 6 songs or whatever it was. All of them had at least one bar chord in it, and I was absolutely terrified. But I think I was incredibly lucky in that sense that I was 12, something like that. I was 12 years old. My brother would have been 14, and it's right now I'm going out and playing pubs and clubs at 12, 13 years old. And
how did that
it's
first
amazing
gig go?
how many musicians. Crazy. It was because it's 2 sets of brothers. Weirdly enough, there was me and my brother on guitar and bass. Then there was the lead guitar player and the drummer were brothers, and we had another guy who was the singer. And it was the other guitar player and drummer's mum's 40th birthday party. So they rented this function room and had the birthday party there, and basically her kids' band was gonna play, and that was my first gig. And there is video footage of it, of me with my newly acquired. Did I have my Epiphone Les Paul then? Yeah, I think I just got an Epiphone Les Paul. It was my pride and joy, and it was strung down my knees because I thought that's what made you look cool. And I think I looked up once. It is kind of cool. It's very cool. I wish I was cool enough to be able to do that, but I look weird, and I struggle to play the guitar with it around my knees.
Well, yeah, it also
but me being
makes
an
it a lot harder to play.
Hetfield nut, it makes it very hard to play. But I think I could just do it at the time. I remember I played well, but I was absolutely terrified. And there is video footage of it. And I think I looked up once, and that one time I looked up, and it was an absolute rammed full of friends and family, and I was like, okay, that was a bad idea. Just keep looking at the guitar.
Is that video footage
if I remember
on
correctly,
YouTube?
I had to start the entire set as well. I hope to God no. I think somebody got it on a VHS, good old fashioned camcorder. This would have been 98, 99, something like that. Right. So yeah, it was pretty crazy. Like a 13-year-old Rich.
One day it's going to surface.
Trying to be cool and it not really working, and then probably. And then I remember after the gig, I think it was my mum was there, and she asked me how did you find it? I was like, terrifying. She was like, would you do it again? And I was like, absolutely. It was the strangest feeling in the world. It was this buzz of, I was absolutely terrified from start to finish, constantly thinking, I'm going to screw up. Oh my God, this is too much. I hate this. I hate this. I hate this when I'm in the moment. And then when I got off, I was like, I can't wait to do that again. It was the weirdest, most addictive feeling. And I don't have to tell you about it. I think every musician kind of gets that weird feeling where you're like, that was terrifying, but oh my God, I need to keep doing this. This was amazing.
Let me ask you this.
How about you? What was your first one like? I was sorry. What was your first gig like?
Oh, also terrifying. I mean, I played school assemblies and that kind of thing, just me with my Les Paul and a drummer, and we would play whatever hot lick song was. We played High Wire by Badlands, and who
Oh
was the
yeah,
band, Kingdom Come. We played Get It On and some Zeppelin stuff, like stuff that the kids were hearing on MTV at the time. But I think my
yeah,
first gig in a city kind of thing was terrifying. It was a hemp fest. Thank God everyone was stoned out of their minds. So, and I was on bass, but I barely looked up also. I was very nervous. So that was what I was going to
yeah.
ask you about, is I used to be a much more nervous performer, and like a lot of musicians, I ended up taking to drinking, and that would be the thing that would get me okay to go on stage. And I've since quit drinking, but I don't get nervous walking on stage at all anymore. I get excited, and I'm wondering, do you have any sort of nerves, or if it's like your first gig, like you just had a first gig this year. I know you're a fella who likes to get himself prepared. You said you transcribed all of the set. Um, do you have any pre-show
Yeah.
rituals? Do you have warm-ups or anything, or any other ritual?
No, this is the strange thing. Like, it doesn't matter what I've been doing. I think I get more nervous at like you say, the first gigs and then the biggest gigs. And even then, the biggest gigs, I wouldn't say it's nerves. It's more just the excitement of, I wonder what it's going to be like when we're on stage. And then by the time you're playing the first song, you're just kind of thinking, this is cool. Now calm down, Rich. Don't get too excited and mess up. Like let's we got a gig to do. Just like any other gig, it's just on a very, very big stage. Like, so it's a bit new. But like my first ever Cradle gig, for example, was just a lot of stuff going on in my brain at that point. Because I think I'd only got the call about 4 or 5 weeks before to like learn that entire set, and it's not like we had a dress rehearsal. We rehearsed because we had 2 new guitar players coming in, so we had like 2 like half-day rehearsals, and then it was the first show. And it's not like we had a dress rehearsal where I was like trying on the costume and the makeup for the first time. The first time I wore the costume and the makeup was the first gig. So it's kind of getting used to that, how it feels playing in the costume. You start overthinking everything you've ever learned, thinking, I hope I've learned this correctly. Okay, don't get in anyone's way. Like, how does this dynamic work in this band? Like, how much should I move? Should I just stay in one spot and headbang, which is kind of what's expected of a lot of metal musicians nowadays. Same with the King 810 tour. Luckily, with the King 810 tour, it was like, here's your podium, don't walk off it. So that was easy. And you've got the mask and the costume and everything like that. So it was like, but even with the King 810, it was like, okay, we've got like a couple of days rehearsals. And then it was like, okay, well, how do I perform? I think that's more what it is. The nerves is like the first gigs is like, how do I fit the aesthetic of this band? And I've got to make sure I don't get in the way of what they already do. So I think that's more the reason I was nervous, not necessarily from a playing perspective.
When all those things are going on in your
how
mind,
I fit in.
Yeah. When all those things are going on in your mind on stage, it takes your focus off of the things that you should be able to absorb. Like, am I getting enough kick and snare so that I can play in time appropriately and I'm in the pocket? Is my mix good? When, like, and I think that's one of those things that I learned a long time ago, to like relax my nerves before a show, so that in the moment I can be in the moment and ask for what I need and accept whatever discomfort on stage comes my way, right? Because there's plenty of discomfort if you and it's coming whether you want it or not. Of course. Do you use a model or you have live amp on stage?
Very good question, because it depends on the situation. Like with King 810, they were on Kempers. In the 8 years I was with Cradle, we went through all kinds of things. Like the first tour I ever did, I was going through a Messer dual rectifier, either a dual or a triple, I can't remember, for a Rooster 2x12 cab. That was, and they were off stage. And then over the years, like later that year, weirdly enough, we ended up doing a Russian tour, and that's when we first got the Kempers, because it was like, okay, well, even hiring a marshal in Russia is going to be very difficult. So let's see what these Kemper things are all about. So the band kind of hired these Kempers, and we used them for a few years. Then we went on to like the Positive Grid, Bias Minis for a while. And then by the time I left the band, we were on the Neural DSP Quad Cortexes. So the Cradle did go into the modeling thing basically like 6 months after I joined the band. But pretty much every other band I've played with, it's been a live amp. Even when I do the musical theatre thing, because I've been playing guitar for musical theatre for many, many, many years now. And that's even switched over onto digital modelers, because the sound guys don't want a real amp. They're like, well, now you've got the option of a modeler, we'll just DI the modeler. And most things are on in-ears now. So it's pretty crazy, even in the musical theatre world.
When you had your amp off stage, you were on in-ears then as well, yes?
In the early Cradle days, I think Danny and Lindsay were on in-ears. Martin, our drummer, had the click and everything, so we had the big headphones on. So we were basically following him. He had the click, but we all followed him, so we didn't have any click or anything. But the frontline two guitar players and bass player, we were still on wedges. So we didn't have in-ears until, I want to say 2017. We were basically told by management, like, right, everybody is going on in-ears now. And so I had to get used to it very, very quickly. But it's really strange. Even the guys the monitor guys in Cradle always were baffled by my mix, because I think, like a lot of people, I've just gotten used to not hearing myself when I played live before I joined Cradle. I joined Cradle and it was a case like, right, what do you want in your mix? And most gigs I've ever played, which hundreds up until that point, maybe close to 1,000 gigs I'd done at that point in my life, I'd never been asked, what do you want in your mix? Because I very rarely had a monitor. So I'm there going, my first Cradle gig, going, what do you want in your mix? I'm like, I don't know.
To be fair, guitarists are usually the loudest one on stage, right?
Yeah, this is the thing. I'm either the loudest one on stage, or I can barely hear myself because I'm pressed right up against my cab, and my cab is blaring at the back of my knees.
Right.
So I kind of just got used to that. And so the monitor guys were always like, it sounds really pretentious to say this. I know it's going to sound pretentious, but like, how do you play so well when you can barely hear yourself, even with in-ears? Like in the end with Cradle, I think I had a lot of kick drum, bass, because I just like bass, and the backing track. And I literally just played to that. Yeah. And that was it. And I'd have a tickle of me just to check if I was in tune or not. I find it really off-putting when I can hear myself too loud. Really off-putting. I need to be in the music, not on the music, where I know a lot of guitar players are the opposite. They like have a quiet full band with them really loud on top, and I find that incredibly off-putting. I make so many mistakes if that happens.
Well, if all you can hear is yourself, or it's an overwhelming volume, it's easier to be self-conscious, or like all of a sudden you're hyper aware of, oh, I'm really loud, and then quack. When I'm tracking, especially rhythm guitar, when I'm tracking rhythm guitar, I will have almost none of myself coming back through the playback, right? I want drums.
I'm the same.
And bass, and I want the scratch vocal in case there's any sort of interplay that's not worked out. And then we'll listen to it afterwards. Like I want to hear the kick and the snare mostly.
Yeah,
and I think
I'm the same. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I mean, I think that it's, I don't know, it works for me. It's interesting that it works for you as well.
Yeah, I think I'm just very, even though I've recorded in a very modern metal way with Cradle, I think I'm just very old school in the sense that I grew up playing in bands. I like to hear and feel the kick, snare, and the bass, and that kind of makes me play better, knowing there's that solid foundation, especially when you know you've got good players. I would rather hear them and like almost play with that than put my guitar tone really loud on top of everything else. I find I just play a lot worse when those kind of mixes happen. Because you know what it is, gig to gig, mixes can change, even if you've got them dialed in to a fine T with in-ears and things. Every room's different. I'm still just using like Shure SE215s. I never went for like molded plugs. Right. Everyone's like, you need to get molded plugs. I'm like, why? I don't think it's going to make me play better because I've got molded plugs or anything like that. Right. Like, I can hear what I can hear, and that's it. You know, I'm not going to blame my skills on the lack of hearing myself because, like I say, I think I've just been used to not hearing myself at gigs. So when I could hear myself at gigs, I was like, I don't know what to ask for. So like I say, the Cradle monitor guys just found it really funny.
Have you sustained?
Not to my knowledge. I don't think so. I might have done. I'm sure my girlfriend would argue that. When she's trying to get my attention, I'm like, what? But I don't think I've had any hearing damage. I've been incredibly fortunate. I've had some scary moments where, especially before I was on in-ears, we'd start a track at a festival and for some reason the side fills are on. Sometimes the side fills weren't on at all, like especially at sound check. Then all of a sudden they're on and they're horrifically loud. I'm like, that's not cool. So that's kind of worrying. I'm trying to do the whole show and I feel like something's gone. But thankfully, there's been, touch wood, there's been no long-term damage.
Right.
How about you? Have you had any hearing damage over the years?
I've got a constant ring, always. Now man. At this moment.
Oh, but, bless you.
You know, what are you going to do?
Does it interfere with you actually playing live? Is it are there times where that kind of constant note is louder than what you're playing? Or
no, the only time that it becomes an issue is in like not loud music places, but loud social places. It's a weird thing. Yeah. I've like as a younger person before this, so I don't know if it's if I'm imagining this, but sometimes my wife and I'll go to a restaurant or something if it's got weird reflective surfaces and it's a busy place and there's so many voices bouncing around and reflecting off of the glass or the steel or whatever. I'll start to lose my mind and I have to leave. Like it'll just send me into a spinner. Not like a panic attack, but I won't be able to focus. It's weird.
Yeah. Yeah, that sucks. And like I do hear horror stories from a lot of people about it, and I'm very fortunate that's not happened. But it could have very easily happened, which is why I know it's I hear stories. I think it was Miles Kennedy got tinnitus from. I think he was recording. I think he was actually in the studio, and he just kept asking for more and more and more. He was trying to hit a certain note. He was like, I just need a little more. I mean, he took his headphones off, and it was like this constant ring that never left. And it was like, oh crap, that's it.
I just saw Jeff Beck.
I've heard so many people say the same.
I saw Jeff Beck last week, and I know that he also has it, and but he seems to be performing just fine.
Yeah, I think people find ways around it, like because, like I say, there was a point where I was kind of worried, like, okay, I really need to look after my hearing now, because I very could have easily gone the other way, whereas I didn't, and it was too late. And I've heard so many stories from people saying it happened like that. But people seem to find ways around it. I've worked with many musicians who have tinnitus, and they seem to do fine. They just find ways to deal with it as best they can.
I have so many questions that I want to ask you, and I'm going to just spit a few of them out, and hopefully, and as things are coming to me, I want to just get them out so the they've been said, and I don't let them go by. So
Yeah.
I want to go back to,
Okay.
all right, young Richard gets out of school, and you're like, all right, I'm ready to shred the faces of the earth off. How long before you were, touring or gigging or earning a living as a musician? And how did the Cradle gig come together? And also, it's interesting that you mentioned that you also do musical theater to me, because there's a bit with the costumery and the heavy metalness of the two gigs that we've already talked about. There's theater to it, right? And I'm wondering if it's it's coincidental, or if they're, if you have if that's part of what you just enjoy to do in general. Like I was a big Kiss fan as a kid, but I haven't
Me too.
been.
Yeah.
I would love to be. I have this idea for a kids band where everyone dresses up, but not as scary things. Almost like the Banana Splits. That was a show in the States. I don't know if it was in the UK, but
it was a thing in the UK as well. Before my time, I know of it, but my parents loved it. So I know of it, and we used to watch reruns of it when I was really tiny. But so it's with the musical theatre thing was just because I was genuinely into musical theatre as a kid. Like, again, like that came about by accident. I was at school, like maybe 13, 14 years old, and my music teacher would put on school shows. Like, put on musicals maybe twice a year, and if they needed a guitar player, they're like, "Rich, you know more than 3 chords. You can be the guitar player." And I'm like, "Okay." Like, first time I'm learning like more than a major or a minor chord. Like, what the hell's a major 7? And thankfully, like, there'll be one of the adult. The teachers was one of the other guitar players who would go, "Okay, this is how you do it." So I was kind of getting guitar lessons while playing guitar. Like, I'm trying to learn all these songs, going, "I've never even heard of these chords." He's like, "Don't worry, it's this." And I go, so I owe a lot of my chord knowledge to the fact that I was playing in musical theatre, just because I was kind of forced to be honest with you. But I did genuinely love playing musical theatre, but that was a big eye-opener into how that kind of side of things work. And that kind of carried on. Like, I went to music school, came out of music school. Going back to your earlier question, this is kind of how I fell into musical theatre as well, doing it almost full-time. Was I came out of music school, moved back in with my parents, and I was like, well, what am I going to do? Do I like move to London and be a struggling musician? Stay where I went to university, which is near London, and be a struggling musician, like most people were, unfortunately? Or do I move back home and at least I don't have to pay extortionate rent while I figure out what I'm going to do next? And I ended up getting a call, weirdly enough, from my old music teacher from secondary school, who was like, "Have you ever thought about teaching guitar?" And I was like, "Not seriously, but I'll do it while I find other work, while I'm doing other things." So I started teaching at a few different schools in the local area. Next thing you know, I'm working 9 a.m. till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday, as a guitar teacher. So I was like, holy crap, I'm actually living the dream. I am playing guitar for a living, and kind of learned how to teach as I went along. And I'm still a guitar teacher now. I love teaching, and it was kind of this vocation that I just fell into accidentally, but didn't realize how much I loved it until I started doing it. And I found it incredibly rewarding, and I still do. So I don't think I'll ever retire from being a guitar teacher. I absolutely love it. So to answer your question, it was fairly sudden after leaving music college and going into. So I was like, okay, I'm making a living playing guitar, teaching guitar. And then it was through that I kind of got into more musical theatre, purely because every school I was at, they were putting on a show. We need a guitar player, but the guitar parts are kind of too hard for the students. Do you mind if you do it? And I was like, okay, yeah, no problem. So in the evenings, I was teaching like 9 till 6, but then in the evenings, I was like, seemed to be doing like a musical theatre show, like all the time. And then word got round, they're like, oh my God, there's a guitar teacher who can actually read music. So I became like one of the guys that they would always call up, like me and like 6 other guys who could actually read music and knew more than power chords. And just like, so I ended up going, okay, I'm working 9 till 6 as a guitar teacher, but now I'm doing the musical theatre thing, but I'm also doing gigs at the weekend with my bands. So it was pretty full on for a long time. I was doing a lot of stuff, and inevitably the stuff with the bands was like unpaid, just going out and just doing it so we can. I loved writing, so I was always writing with my bands and going out and performing with my bands.
Wait a minute, do you mean to tell me that some bands don't get paid?
Teaching. Yeah. So, but that's just what it was. I never knew you could get paid to be in bands. For the longest time, I was just like, well, this is just what you do, isn't it? You trek up and down the country. You get fuel money if you're lucky. It's like, well, I've got my job as a guitar teacher and playing guitar in musical theatre is kind of helping to fund the stuff my pleasure projects, which I was also doing for years. And that's, strangely enough, how the Cradle thing came around. I kept bumping into this one particular person who was a sound guy. And he ironically did like my band's first demo when I was like 14, 15 years old. But he went off and started touring the world with bands like Cradle and Lacuna Coil and these kind of bands. But he would also come home, and when he wasn't on tour, he was doing sound for a lot of the musical theatre stuff I was doing. So we stayed in touch. He was always asking about my bands. Sometimes he would end up doing sound for my bands at like a local bar or whatever we're playing.
Yeah.
And then I get a call from him out of the blue saying, would you be free to tour the whole of February? This was like at the end of December. I got this call going, one of the bands I work for, and he works with a lot of bands from Cradle level and around that kind of level to just local kind of punk bands. So he was like, there's a band going on a European tour. Are you free for the whole month of February to do it if I put your name forward? I don't want to put your name forward and then it turns out you can't do it. I want to check that you want to do it. I was like, of course, who's it for? And that's when he said it's Cradle of Filth. And I was like, oh, I was expecting like one of the like 3-chord punk bands, like going on their first like kind of grassroots European tour or whatever, like in a van. And I might be required to drive a van as well and all this kind of stuff. I was like, no, this is a real deal. Tour buses, real backstage areas, you know, a crew, a guitar tech. I always thought making it was when you had a guitar tech.
Right.
I was like, you mean I don't have to change my own strings before a show?
I don't even have to carry my guitar in.
Yeah, exactly. And it was like, okay, this is weird. I was like, yeah, put me forward for it. And I was getting pretty nervous at this point, going, oh my God, what if I do end up playing guitar for Cradle of Filth? Because at the time, from what I gather, there were people they had approached, a lot of people they approached, but they actually hadn't handed in their audition video yet. And this was like maybe three or 4 weeks they'd been waiting to hear back from people, and nobody had handed them in yet, as far as I'm aware.
Right.
And that's when I got put in touch with someone else who was their tour manager at the time, who was a bit of a legend in the industry as it is. And he asked me a bunch of questions, basically like to check if I was roadworthy. If I'd be nervous, like go on a big stage. Thankfully, I'd played like quite a few big festivals with my other bands. Who was like, okay, so you're used to playing big crowds and stuff, because that could have been a game changer. Had I not done that with my previous bands, he was probably like, I think you'll be terrified and you haven't got enough experience to do it. But in his eyes, he was like, we think you've got the experience. We think you're a good enough player. We wouldn't have called you at all if we didn't think you were good enough of a job. We think you've got the touring experience. And then he put me in touch with Cradle's drummer. So he was kind of overseeing the whole, are these guys good enough? Do they look the part? You know, all that kind of stuff. And then he said, well, if you could do like a video audition of 2 songs, which were Cthulhu Dawn and Born in a Burial Gown, that would be great. And I was like, when's the deadline? And he said, today. The deadline is actually today. I was like, oh, crap. He says, but obviously because you're getting the call technically this morning, we'll give you a few extra days. And I kind of put the phone down. I was like, right, I'm going to learn these 2 songs. as well as I could, filmed them and sent them off to them like a few hours later. And that was it. And apparently I was the only one who handed in the audition tape on time. And I'm the guy who got the call the morning of the deadline. So, and I think that's what got me the job, because I know it sounds, it's my imposter syndrome again. I think I got the job because I was the cheapest option, in all honesty, because I was already in the UK. I was a UK-based guitar player. From the sounds of it, everybody else they asked were from around the world. So I was the cheapest option in terms of physically getting me on tour, to getting me to the rehearsals. I drove myself to the rehearsals. So it was like I didn't have to like pay for my transport or anything like that. And I handed in the audition tape on time. So they're like, well, we haven't got many people to choose from, so I think this is the guy. And I was only meant to be the fill-in guy for like that one tour. And then I ended up sticking around for 8 years.
Isn't that the way?
Which is kind of crazy. It's the way. And ironically, when I left Cradle, it was the same guy who recommended me for Cradle who recommended me for King 810.
Is that right?
So it's just kind of, I owe that guy quite a lot. Yeah, it was the same guy. He became the sound guy.
Hey, will you introduce me to this guy?
And he went, I know a guitar player. Yeah. It was like, again, King 810. That was a similar thing where they're like, I got a call out of the blue. I was already thinking of leaving Cradle at this point, like not to go too much down that rabbit hole, but I was starting to just become really unhappy. I was a family man now. I had a kid. I was going on tour, leaving my kid, and I love touring, writing, and recording, but there was stuff behind the scenes in Cradle that were not washing with me, basically, and I was becoming quite unhappy, very unhappy, in fact. And then that's when the guy who ironically got me the job in Cradle all those years ago called me up and was like, I'm actually doing sound for King 810. They need a guitar player for the tour. And this was a UK and European tour, but Cradle were on tour. We're going to be on tour in America. And I was approached by King 810. I was like, well, I'm thinking of already leaving Cradle. The thought of going on tour, doing this American tour with Cradle is crazy, but I've got nothing to go to. It'll be just like I'm walking away and that's it. I've got nothing to go to. And I'll just figure out what my next move was. And he gave me the call asking, well, the job is yours if you want to do it, because the guys know who you are. They're fans. I'm a King 810 fan. My girlfriend's a huge King 810 fan, so she was like, please do it. That would be awesome if you did it. If you play guitar, like my favorite band. And that's kind of how that came about. I was already like kind of umming and ahhing whether I should leave Cradle or not. And then when another offer came in, I was like, okay, there is, not to get too deep with it, but there was almost like, will there be life after Cradle kind of thing?
Of course.
Because I'm walking away from an established band. Like it's a guaranteed thing, but I'm not happy in it.
And 8 years of doing it.
Yeah, 8 years, 3 albums, a lot of touring. I like I say, I love it, but when there's stuff behind the scenes making you unhappy, it's like, is this worth sticking around for? Maybe it'll get better. And in my opinion, it got worse. And I was like, okay, it'll make my life easier if I knew I was walking away with something lined up. And then I'm not a big believer in this stuff, but I don't know if the universe was listening or something, and they just went, here's an opportunity. I was like, you know what, I'm going to take it. And that's when I sent the email to Cradle going, I'm sorry, I'm not doing this tour. I'm going to do this tour instead. I'm gone. Sorry. and that was it, really. So like this guy gave me quite a few opportunities, like with Cradle and King, and what a guy. He changed my life.
I'd appreciate an introduction to this friend of yours. I'm available.
Yes, I will happily introduce you to him. Yeah, it's just one of those things. It just happened like in the
That's great.
It's like back then it was. Like I say, I'm not a believer in this, but I suppose I am. At the time, I've been teaching guitar for 8 years at this point, and teaching a lot of little kids who never really practiced. You're turning up into these schools teaching kids. You're lucky if one kid has practiced like 3 hours back to back before you go to the next school. And I was like, do I want to keep doing this until the day I retire? I was like, I enjoy it, but I feel like a glorified babysitter sometimes.
Of course.
And then he offered the Cradle of Filth job to me, and I was like, okay, this is weird. Like, it was almost like I was ready for a change, and that happened. Same thing happened with Cradle. I was ready for a change, and the same guy offered me this thing. So I'm like, this is really odd. So life has a funny way of working out in that sense. Really odd.
Well, I think if you have a reputation as being anything really other than difficult, like, really, you don't even have to be an amazing person, right? If you're just not difficult,
yeah,
things will go okay. Probably.
Yeah, this is what I say to a lot of my students, and I need to remember this at times, because I think every musician gets this. I'm going through this at the moment, speaking super candidly. Now that I've done a lot of stuff and filled up my diary for this year, it's like, okay, well, what's next? There's not really anything in the diary. So is that it? Am I no longer a musician anymore? Like, I'm still teaching guitar, but thanks to the financial crisis and everything, it's like I'm not working as much as I was. So it's one of those things where I'm like, is this it? Have I had my 15 minutes of fame? Whatever fame is, you know?
I have that conversation
I'm a big
in my
believer
own
that
head
stuff comes up
all the time.
Yeah. I've spoken to a lot of musicians about this, and even very successful musicians are like, I'm one tour away from not having any work. And they're starting to think, what the hell, what do I do? And these are some very established names I've spoken to, way bigger than I'll ever be. And I think there is that feeling that all kind of self-employed musicians have. It's like, I'm one tour away from not being a musician anymore. It's kind of weird, like financially not being a musician. I've got to find something else. And I've been incredibly fortunate that I've always still paid the bills with music.
I think the dangerous thing about having that idea in your head, I've adopted this attitude of be careful what you think, because once you think it, it plants a seed, and you think it again. You think it 100 times in a day. A couple of those seeds are going to actually grow, and then there is that doubt in your mind. But whether or not you have a gig and you're out performing, you're a musician, and you're alive.
Exactly.
As far as we know, we're all alive. And, you're one phone call away from having a gig. That doesn't mean you're not a musician. You're a musician. If you're digging ditches, you're a musician. I try to imagine all of the times in my life when I wanted a gig and didn't have one. And then when I was on, playing the main stage at Hellfest, it's like, the two things are a week apart. It's like I get home and I'm straight back to my gig, my job.
Yeah, it's the way it is, and it is. I could be really pessimistic and go, "Does any of it really matter?" and all this kind of stuff, because you get the highest of highs, and then you just go, "Okay, well, now I'm going to go back to mediocrity." You know what I mean? And I don't think like that at all. I was like, it's just all part and parcel of what it is of being a musician in this day and age. Is just you do what you got to do, and you don't take the good times for granted. You realize it's a one shot kind of deal. Like, I remember playing main stage download and go, I've made it, and then the next day going, okay, well, I'm back to teaching students again. My life didn't change. And I know this sounds really odd, and if anyone's watching this and listening to this, this is the biggest thing I think I've ever learned from doing the highest of highs. It's like I've done those highest of highs and fulfilled a lot of my dreams. I don't think I don't know why, but I think I expected this light bulb thing to go, now my life has changed forever because I did this. I achieved my childhood dreams. And it's weird. It didn't. And I think a lot of people, speaking candidly, I think a lot of people need to almost like live out their dreams to realize it's not everything, not to get too hippy-trippy and deep about it, but it's like,
I think it's why a lot of musicians die young.
I'd be happy and be truly happy. Yeah. It's weird. They achieve everything and then they go, is that it?
Right.
Oh, okay. Well, I thought this crazy euphoric moment would happen. And it's great, don't get me wrong, it is incredible. But the next day I woke up and did my life as normal. And I was like, well, nothing changed. And it was kind of weird dealing with that for the longest time. Now I just take it for what it is. And it's like,
perception
when
of
the
what
good times
people
are good,
doing,
don't take them for granted.
Like you see
exactly. Everyone's
photographs,
living the
you
high
see
life.
a photograph,
Social media
it's
definitely makes
glamorous.
it worse.
You see a music video, it's glamorous. You see, a live thing, even a thing on YouTube, you're like, wow, look at that big stage and the lights and everyone's cheering and it's amazing. But, that band walks off stage and goes back and they're like, fuck, they shorted us on water again and and the catering sucks. Right? So
yeah, and this is the thing.
Not
like,
glamorous.
don't get me wrong, I always try and keep that head on. No, 9 times out of 10, it's not glamorous. Don't get me wrong, I've done some very glamorous things where you go, well, that was cool. That was way better than expected. But 9 times out of 10, it's not that glamorous, and you've got to really, really want to be a touring musician. You've got to be a musician full stop. It like compels you to be a musician. You don't do it because it's comfortable. I don't know many musicians who are comfortable. It may look that way,
right?
But I don't know many. And not just financially. I'm just talking like literally like the touring lifestyle is comfortable. Like so many bands, so many big bands I know are out there right now touring in vans, just because it's cheaper. They could easily go in a tour bus, but they're like, no, we're going to make it cheaper and more efficient
so that they can
for
go
ourselves.
Home with money at the end.
This is it. We're going to be traveling in a van for like 7 hours. Yeah, everyone's feeling it. I've got some friends who work with pop artists, and even some who are huge. Even some of them are still going out in vans, and they go, "Yep, everyone thinks it's glamorous because they see what it's like on stage. It's not so glamorous after." Some of them, don't get me wrong, are being treated exceptionally well because they're working with super huge pop stars. But even then, they're like, "Yep." They work with these huge pop stars, and they're like, and then when the tour is over, they go back to doing whatever they were doing before, waiting for the next call. So it's all. I think a thing of being a musician is dealing with that, and I think a lot of people do struggle with that, like you said. That's why a lot of people die young or turn to certain things to kind of help mentally deal with that. You're doing this, and then you're doing nothing. Exactly. Some people really struggle with that. Now, I think I've just gotten kind of used to it. It's just the way it is.
Talk to me about the element of being on stage, because there is some theater to the bands that you have done your biggest tours with, right? There's when you're on stage, you've got to present yourself with confidence. It's not your first gig at the 40th birthday party, right? You have to engage the crowd. Yeah. There's all of these things where you present yourself and you're enjoying yourself. But you're a really grounded human. I appreciate that. When you walk off stage, it's like, all right, well, that was cool, right? Now what? Talk to me about that pendulum, because it's pretty bizarre, especially the going straight back to work the next day.
It is bizarre. Yeah, I'll always remember there was that one time, just to put it in perspective, like the contrast my life was at the time. I think I've been in Cradle about a year at this point, and we played a festival in the Philippines. Yeah, we played in Manila at Pulp Summer Slam. And it was the weekend of what was going to be my 30th birthday. I turned 30 on the Tuesday, and we played on the Saturday in Philippines. I think I flew on the Friday. I finished work, went straight to basically went home, picked up my guitar, went to the airport, flew to the gig, basically slept all day so we could play the gig in the evening. Flew back on the Saturday. Stupidly, I was back at work on Monday morning, and nobody knew what I was up to at the weekend. Nobody asked. Everyone was like, "How was your weekend?" It was like, "Oh, pretty good." Cool. Did you do anything much?
Still a little bit of eyeliner smudge, though.
And that was it. Yeah, exactly. It was like the whole. Have you seen the movie Rockstar?
Yeah, he's like, I'm in a band.
Have you seen Rockstar? But really, like, yeah, like where he's got the eyeliner. It's like, I'm in a band, and it's like, whereas it was kind of like that, and I was like living two different lives, and I think I just kind of got used to it, and that was the case. It was about a year and a half. I was doing that while still being in Cradle of Filth. I was still holding down my day job because we weren't touring enough for me to quit my day job at the time of teaching guitar in schools. And then when we went on like all the tours I'd done, I think the longest one was 4 weeks, and then there was like summer festivals, and then we did like another 3-week run at the end of the year. We weren't touring a lot in that first year and a half I was in the band. And then when it got into the full-on like world tour schedule, it was like, okay, I do need to quit. And even then it was like, okay, come back from a world tour and go, cool, I need to find some work. So it was very grounding, like pretty much straight away. And it's just,
right.
I think I've just gotten used to that feeling. Like every tour I've come back from, like towards the end, you're like, okay, let's start drumming up some teaching work, some studio work, whatever it is. Just put the feelers out there that, yeah, this tour is not lasting forever. I'm going to need some work when I come home. And it's just the way I've always been. I think I've gotten used to it. But like I say, some people do struggle with that. It's like, what do I do now when I come off a world tour?
Do you think there's an element to that that's good for keeping your ego in check? Because I do.
Definitely. Yeah, I know a lot of people who sounds horrible, but kind of need to keep those egos in check, and they can't. I think they do. They kind of get used to this lifestyle on the road, and then they kind of continue that lifestyle when they're at home.
Right.
And it doesn't do well for relationships. It doesn't do well for a lot of aspects in your life. People start acting a certain way that's not conducive to normal day-to-day behavior. And I've always been incredibly fortunate, and I think a lot of musicians are the same, to be fair. They're incredibly fortunate that they have a really good family and a good circle of friends who, as soon as you meet up with them, you don't really think about that kind of band thing. You're not Richard Shaw from Cradle of Filth anymore. You're just Richard Shaw, to these people.
Right.
They knew you since you were at school and all this kind of stuff. They keep you in check very quickly. You don't even, unless they ask, you don't really bring up what happened on tour or anything like this. And obviously now I'm a family man. I've got a kid and my girlfriend. Like it's very easy to just come off a tour and she's like, cool, I'm glad you're back. There are dishes.
Right.
If you can just do the dishes before you like change our child's nappy and all this kind of stuff, you're like,
run to the store,
okay.
Get some diapers.
and it's exactly. It was that when I finished the first Cradle tour I did after Rory was born was that final US tour that I did, and I came back from the US and it was just brilliant. I was just sat there watching TV with my son and my girlfriend and my dogs, just going, cool. And it was like, there, bang, there you go. There's your dose of reality, but in the best way possible. And
right.
It's like just super grounding, just walking home. Whereas when I was living on my own, before I had a family, I'd come back from tour and kind of be like, what do I do? What did I do before I went on tour? Like kind of, and it took me a while to adjust until I met up with my friends and family, and I was like, oh, okay, cool, this is back to normal.
Is it a coincidence, or did
possible.
you name your son after Rory Gallagher?
It's a coincidence, really. I am a Rory Gallagher fan, but my girlfriend Cherise, she mentioned the name Rory. And at first, if I'm being totally honest with you, I wasn't the biggest fan of the name Rory. It took me a while to come round to that, going, actually, yeah. Like, and we waited until he was born. We had like 3 or 4 names where we're like, and then when he was born, we did look at each other and go, yeah, Rory. Rory suits him. Yeah. So it was weird because I was a Rory fan, but I'm not the biggest Rory fan in the world, but I do really like his stuff. Sure. So it wasn't one of those things where it was because of him, but it's pretty cool that he does share a name.
Pretty cool name. Good job, Dad.
Yeah.
So
thanks.
I think it's easy.
Give that one to Cherise.
Got it. I know it's easy to let the feelings that you had when you left Cradle be the lingering feeling, but a lot of great things happened between the time you started playing with him and stopped. I would love if you could share some of your favorite highlight moments, like your first gig, maybe your favorite gig. I know, I've done festival day. I think it was before you were in the band, but I've done festival dates, and there were, Paul Gilbert was on that gig, and it was just like, this is wild. It was like Judas Priest.
Yeah.
You're seeing all these bands that you grew up loving, and so I know you've hung out with and played on stages with a ton of people that you've admired, including Metallica. I'm sure. But
funnily enough, no, we never shared a stage with Metallica. Funnily enough, in the whole time I was doing it, Metallica, they were on tour. It would always happen that Metallica were on tour at the same time as Cradle. So I missed Metallica a few times because I had my tickets and then have to sell them because Cradle would announce a tour. But we never seemed to cross paths, not even doing festivals or anything with Metallica. But it happened with a lot of bands where we were sharing a lot of the same festivals and get to know and hang out with some of my favourite bands. And it was a trip. It was amazing.
I'd love it if you would talk about some of those things. And then I would also like to hear just like, so you leave that situation, sort of like unburden yourself with this unhappiness. And what was it like? Like, did you have, what kind of rehearsal did you have? And how was the first gig, and how was the tour just being introduced to playing with new people? Like, for the first time, going on tour for the first time in 8 years with a fresh crew of folks that I assume you didn't know.
I kind of knew them, like with the King guys. We kind of kept in touch over the years because Matt, the guy who got me the job in Cradle and recommended me for King, he was always like whispering in their ear, going like, "Oh, Rich is a fan. Like, if you need a guitar player," and they're like, "Well, we're Cradle fans, and we know, of course, we know who Rich is." And then we kind of set up a rapport just through him, really, over the years. And then, but it never turned into anything serious because Cradle. They asked me a few times before, but Cradle were always on tour at the same time, and I was like, "It's just one of those things. I'm on tour with Cradle. I'd love to do it, but it's not in a break in my schedule." So so when I first joined Cradle, obviously everything's new. Touring at that level was something I'd not done before. Going, can you sustain like a hour and a half, 2 hour show night after night for a month on end? And then I realized I really enjoyed it. I got into it and I was like, this is cool. This will be a shame if it never happened again. And they're like, at the end of the tour, Danny sat me down and was like, well, do you want to stay? I was like, what do you mean stay? He says, well, the previous guitar player's not coming back, and we need to write a new album. So do you write? I was like, I do write, thinking, I've never written anything in this style of music before, but, I'm willing to figure out how to do it. And then we ended up, over the years, making 3 albums I'm incredibly proud of. And I'll always be grateful and proud of my time in Cradle of Filth. Always. It was just towards the end, I was like, I don't know if this is worth sticking around for anymore.
Sure.
So that's what I did. When the fun stops, it's time to go, kind of thing. So, but there's so many moments in Cradle that were incredible. I just got to the most obvious ones that spring to mind is I just got to tour the world. I got to see a lot of the world, and I'm sure you know how it is as well. Sometimes you're physically in certain parts of the world, but you don't really see it. So there are certain parts of the world where people are like, what's this place like? I'm like, I really couldn't tell you. I saw the airport, the hotel, and the venue. I could not tell you anything apart from what I saw out the van window or something like that. That's it.
Yeah, green rooms don't deviate
but most
much
of the time
from
it was incredible. That's the thing. I've got a lot of friends who are in bigger bands who play arenas, and they're like, that's when it gets even weirder, because pretty much every arena backstage is identical. So it's you've really got to check which city you're in, because arenas and stuff, which I was lucky to play like a couple of arenas with Cradle, but I wouldn't say it was a regular thing at all. It was more just like big festivals or whatever that happened to be in arenas. But yeah, like main stage download was a highlight, because I lived like 20 minutes from Donington, like pretty much my entire life. So it was like the local kid done good kind of thing when I did main stage. It was really strange playing main stage download. I was like, oh, I went to school with that guy. Oh, like that's my friend from hi. Like try to keep in character while going, this is really cool.
It's an ocean of heads as far back as you can see.
It's crazy. And don't get me wrong, I was surprised because we have done bigger gigs than Download.
Right.
Like we did like main stage Vakken. We went on after Judas Priest doing Vakken. We were like the deadliner, the first deadliner after Judas Priest technically headlined it. So the way I see it, technically we went on after Judas Priest. I remember putting on my leather outfit while they're playing Hellbent for Leather. And I'm there going, this is pretty weird. Like you could hear it in the background. Yep, Hellbent for Leather. Well, I'm just doing it. But
wait a minute. Was it real leather or is it pleather? It's actual leather?
It was kind of pleather, yeah. Like most of the time, we had different outfits for different tours and stuff like that. But it's easier to keep clean. But I would say it's still not easy to keep clean, but easier to keep clean. The smell in those backstage areas after a few shows is quite interesting. Trying to keep all that stuff clean is incredibly difficult. But you know,
did you guys have a wardrobe person?
No.
So you guys had to maintain.
They did when they were bigger. We had to maintain it ourselves. I would kind of, I think we all would, to be fair, just kind of keep it in our suitcase. Thankfully, I've got one of those suitcases that has like a separate zip compartment, and I would just kind of hide it away in there. After a show, basically just dry it, spray it with alcohol, and just hopefully it kills the bacteria. And then you'd get it out your suitcase the next day and be like, oh man, like, let's just air this. Sometimes you just haven't got enough time to air it out, and you're putting on like wet clothes from a previous night, and you're like, that's glamorous. But you know what? At the time, I wouldn't have had it any other way. I was like, I'm traveling the world playing in front of really good crowds, appreciative fans. It was amazing for the longest time, and this is what I mean. I just wish everybody could get the opportunity to do something like that, because it is incredible. But like I say, just stuff behind the scenes made me go, I think it's time to go. I don't know if I want to keep doing this. I want to keep doing this, but I don't know if it's the band to keep doing it with. Let's put it that way. So when the King tour came around, that was odd in the sense that it's a very different style of metal to Cradle of Filth. And it's been the same. Even when I was in Cradle of Filth, I was still doing cover band gigs, musical theatre gigs. Like in the spaces between tours, I was still filling my diary doing that kind of stuff. So as weird as it sounds, Cradle was another one of those gigs where every time I turn up to musical theatre, I'm playing with completely different musicians I've never even met. Because the orchestras can be so big, you don't even know who the people in the orchestra are. Like I've done quite a few orchestra gigs, and you just go, I haven't even got time to introduce myself to this orchestra, and I do like 3 shows with them, and I still don't know who they all are by the time that run is finished, just because there's so many people, and you don't really get the chance to chit chat before you're off to do the next thing or whatever. And so I think I'm kind of used to being in a situation where it's like, hi, here's this person, let's play some music. It was exactly the same in Cradle. I met the band the morning of my first rehearsal.
Right.
So, yes, there'd been like email chains, but it's like, I don't know, other than the photos I see, the press photos, I don't know what these people look like. But we're like communicating, trying to work out, like, especially me and the other guitar player, because we both joined on the same day in Cradle. So we're there going, they've got 2 new guitar players who don't know, both of them don't know who's in the band. We don't know the members of the band. Hi, nice to meet you, everybody. Oh, you're the guy I've been emailing about checking I've got the right guitar parts, because I had to learn one guitar part yet. Like emailing each other, going, right, what have you got for this? What have you got for that? And then you'd actually meet in person, and like about 20 minutes later, it's like, cool, shall we count off the first song? And we just got to know each other on the tour. And it was similar in King. When I joined King, it was like, well, I was kind of nervous in the same way I was nervous doing Cradle, because I was like, this is a very different style of metal. This isn't exactly what I'm known for doing, but I still enjoy playing it. But there's no other guitar player to ask if I'm playing the parts correctly or anything like this. It was just like, I've got to do it as close as I can from the record. And then they rehearsed in a completely different way to how Cradle rehearsed. In the sense is like, just go over it, see what happens. Cradle was more like, right, let's play the set, start to finish. Then we'll worry about any specific things we need to go over. With King, it was more like a very laid back, let's just try this song. Let's just try that. Like, let's just, should we go out and grab some lunch? Yeah, and it was very, very chilled. And don't get me wrong, in Cradle, it became very chilled. But at the start, it was more like, we've got like 2 half-day rehearsals to get 2 guitar players up to scratch. We really need to go over this stuff a lot. Whereas King, it was like, we've got the time. We're okay. They would just say, try it like this. But I know you're playing it like the record, but live, we've tried it like this. So it was like learning a lot of the things that are different to the record that they'd kind of honed over the years. Whereas Cradle, it was more like you play it exactly like the record every single time. So it was just a very different kind of vibe. But I think I'm very lucky, and I'm aware I'm talking too much now, but I think I've always been very lucky that in sense I've just learned to adapt to the people I'm playing with. They have a certain way they do things as a session guitar player, because even in Cradle, I was always a session guitar player. I was a session guitar player from the whole time. Yes, I wrote for the band, but I was a session guitar player. You know, I get paid the session wage kind of thing. So it was the same. Whatever situation I've been in, I've gone in as a session player and gone, right, I need to assess how they work things from a musical point of view, but also from like a staging point of view, a personality point of view. You kind of like take a step back for a while and kind of assess the situation, go, right, okay, what's this person like? I know what buttons not to press. Not that I intentionally try to press buttons, but you're like, try and find out what people are like and just try and fit in as best as I can.
That's some of my favorite part of tour. I mean, there's so much fun to be had, like navigating your way through a bus of people, right? And the personalities.
Yeah.
And then, you can walk off
that
and
was
have
the thing,
little
weirdly enough. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Day trips. You go, hey, we haven't hung out. You want to go get coffee? Let's go walk 6 miles around town.
Yeah. I love that. I love that happened fairly often, especially the last few years in Cradle, because we seem to get through lots of different crew, to be honest with you. And you know how it is. The crew and the band, they're not separate. It's like one big touring family.
Yeah.
At least every tour I've ever done. And you go out and go, right, do you drink coffee? Yes, cool, let's go get coffee. Let's hang out. Let's just have a chat.
Yeah.
Yes, you're my guitar tech, but we haven't had time to really, apart from discuss specifics of what I want my guitars to be and my sound to be or whatever. I try and do it as early on as I can, because I don't want somebody to think they're just working for the band.
Right.
Because I hate that dynamic. It's like, technically, you're making me sound good. We're working together. You're not working for me. We're working together. It's part of it. It's a traveling circus. And it was the same with King. Even though it was a much smaller crew of people, it was just such a good vibe. Instantly you get to know people and you can see the kind of jokes for cracking between each other. And you go, okay, so that's the kind of humor that these guys have. And you kind of just fit into it. And I think I'm very lucky in the sense that I can adapt relatively quickly. Because I have done some tours where you just go, okay, this person's going to be very difficult to work with. I'll just keep my distance, be nice, do my job. I'll try and get on with them, but got a feeling that this person just doesn't want anyone to get on with them. I've done a few tours like that, and they suck. Yeah. You go, I just want to get to the gig and play the show, because being around this person is kind of difficult. And you can't please everybody.
The only
you try
Brit
and get on with this person, and you can just tell you're getting nothing back. Apart from the sound guy who got me the job, yes.
Was that
I
odd?
would have been the only Brit. Yeah, which was really interesting.
Right.
Because there were times, especially because I even said to the guys, what do you want me to do, after the show. They're like, what do you mean after the show? I was like, do you want me to go out? Because we had the mask and everything, I'm like, it'd be pretty cool. Like, what if I went to like the merch booth? And they're like, that's actually a really good idea. I was like, you guys have never done that? This is like the perfect photo opportunity. And not to sound too like a business, it's like if I do it at the merch booth, hopefully a line for while people are waiting to take photos, they're like, while I'm here, I might as well buy a t-shirt kind of thing. So I was like, well, I'll go out. And the drummer did it as well. And the number of times where people would like be asking me questions, because at the time nobody knew I was doing it. We kept it very hush-hush that I was playing guitar for them until the day after the tour. They were like, if you want to announce it, you can. Now that you've done the tour. I was like, yeah, let's do it. So yeah, people were asking me questions like after the show, and I'm there just completely silent because my accent is very un-American. So it becomes very obvious that there's a Brit in the band. So I just had to like kind of pretend to be cooler and more of a gangster than I really am. I don't know what word to call it, but I was just there trying to be all mean. Where inside I'm going, hi, nice to meet you. How you guys doing? And I couldn't really say anything for a while because it would be a dead giveaway that I'm not that cool, you know. Yeah, but yeah,
what about the dynamic?
It's a good dynamic. It was a really good dynamic.
Being on stage with absolute anonymity. Was that weird?
I absolutely love it. I'm kind of, I know it sounds odd to a lot of people, but I'm used to the anonymity. I prefer it, as weird as it sounds.
Not to me.
Because I like to just do my thing. I like music. I like playing guitar. I like creating music. I like performing, but I don't do it as a look at me, look at me, look at me thing. It's more like I just love playing music. So I prefer the anonymity. And a lot of people ask me what it was like being in a famous band. You're now a famous guy because you played in a famous band. I was like, and I had this moment, and I have this moment often, and I think it's brilliant. I actually was driving a van and tour managing a Black Sabbath tribute band from LA last week. And I got talking to this guy at a bar waiting for them to go on. Well, he got talking to me, weirdly enough, and he's wearing my face on his T-shirt.
And he doesn't realize it.
And we get talking for a while. He has no idea who I am. And this happened a lot in my time in Cradle of Filth. The number of times I saw it on Cradle of Filth forums, and I had to laugh. At first, I got kind of upset by it, but I think that was more of an ego thing that I was very much trying to keep in check. But people get really upset on the Cradle of Filth forums. It didn't happen often, but every now and again it would happen where there'd be a group of people who were like, yeah, Rich is a dick. He was the only guy who didn't come out and like sign autographs and say hello to people. If people knew who I was, because let's be honest, most people think Cradle of Filth is Danny and some musicians. So the diehard fans know who the musicians are. So there's loads of people going, yeah, Rich is a dick. He didn't come out and say hello after the show. And I've got photos with everybody and autographs with everybody apart from Rich. What a dick. And I just responded going, who do you think took the photos? I was the guy taking the photos for them. And nobody knew it was me. And so when people are going, what's it like to be famous? I'm like, not even Cradle of Filth fans knew who I was. So it still happens where, like last week, I was just talking to this guy. I was like, this guy was like, have you seen this Black Sabbath tribute band before? I was like, yeah, I have. Yeah. They're really, really good. Have you seen them before? Yeah. I love them. I'll see them every time we come to the UK. And we're just having this really good chat. I'm like, yeah, enjoy the show. And he had no idea he was talking to the guy who was on his T-shirt. And it's just that happened way more often than people who knew who I was.
Right.
Way more. So that's why I find the whole fame thing hilarious. So when King were like, yeah, you're going to put on a mask, I was like, gladly. I played in a Ghost tribute band, and it was amazing. Playing in a Ghost tribute band was like, I get to like pretend to be a nameless ghoul, because I love Ghost, and
me too.
I get to pretend to be a nameless ghoul for a while, and it was amazing how many people were like, Cradle of Filth fans would be in the crowd and have no idea it was me, and then I'd take the mask off and pack down my equipment. People still didn't know it was me. You know, it was just, and you can see the Cradle of Filth shirts in the audience. It's like they have no idea who I am. And then when they find out it is who, like, maybe I've done a post going, just come back from a tour playing for the Ghost tribute band. People are like, I saw you and I had no idea it was you, even when the mask is off and I'm packing down my own equipment. It's just people don't think that. Why would the guitar player from Cradle of Filth be in this tiny?
It's wild
bar
to me that there's a Ghost tribute band out there.
You know. Oh yeah, I think we were first in the UK, and that happened by accident. I've played with, I think, 5 tribute bands now. Yeah, I was like doing all these tribute bands at the same time while I've got my own bands and Cradle and all this kind of stuff going on. It was just whatever it took to make a living playing guitar.
Of course.
But the tribute bands were just a lot of fun. And it was always just one of my mates going, how about we do this? I'm like, well, if you need a guitar player, let me know. And then like a week later, I get a phone call going, yeah, I've got the band together. Are you still up for guitar? I was like, oh, okay, well, it's actually happening. All right, then. And the Ghost thing came about where it was just going to be a one-off thing where we were going to play Meliora in its entirety. Plus, I think we did like 2 encores after we played the whole album. And then that was it. And it was like a sold-out show in Nottingham. And that was it. That was all it was ever intended to be, just a one-off show, just for shits and giggles, really. And then all of a sudden, like, venues were contacting the band going, cool, how much to put you guys on? And we're like, oh, so there's actually a demand for this. And we went out and I did that for a couple of years, and it was just a lot of fun doing the Ghost tribute stuff. I was like, well, this is the nearest I'm ever going to get to actually being in Ghost, so this is fun. I'm going to
never say never.
But Ghost would still be my dream gig. I'm not going to lie. I would love to be in Ghost, but from the sounds of it, like, I know people who have been in Ghost. I'm not going to out them, obviously, on the line, but they've been in Ghost. I know a couple of guys who are currently in Ghost, and I've just got talking to them. It's just one of those things. I think Tobias is just really, really happy with the band. So unless somebody leaves of their own accord, then I'm never going to. I don't think I'll ever get a look in anyway, but it would be fun. It would be like a dream gig because it's like, cool, I can still play guitar and do all this thing and nobody knows it's me. Even better.
I would love the bass gig in Ghost. Currently, I'm, I shouldn't, well, by the time this episode comes out, we'll have played some gigs, but I'm in a tour with Chris Catalyst, who's currently one of the ghouls, and I think that's public also. They took a tour
it is public.
photo
I think it was, they did a tour photo at the end, and I remember seeing that going, what the hell? And I know Ryan, the photographer for Ghost, I messaged him going, was this okayed? Yeah. He was like, yeah, boss man said it was okay. So that's it. And it was like, oh my God. So, and that's incredible. I think that was great because from the sounds of it, that particular lineup that it's had for a while has been very stable. And I'm really, really happy that they got the chance to go, okay, yes, this is what I've been doing for the last 3 or 4 years of my life that I've had to keep quiet about. And because they're all incredible musicians. So I'm really, really happy that they all got the chance. And it was especially with Chris, if we're allowed to openly talk about it, which I think we are. With Chris, it was one of those things where it was like one of the worst kept secrets in the industry. But I think everybody respected it enough not to be the one to out him, if that makes sense, because he's such a cool guy. I've never actually met him, but I've heard reports from that he's a really, really cool guy.
The best dude.
And he's got like my dream job, basically. Yeah, he's such a cool guy from what I gather. And he's such a talented guitar player, and he's got his own thing that I'm liking. So yeah, he's really cool, great musician, great writer, and he deserves that recognition, as do the rest of them. So yeah, I think it's amazing that Tobias said it was okay.
Outside of playing metal, do you just like listen to metal music as a casual fan or as a fanatic? Are you, when you're listening to music at home or driving, what are you listening to?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I just find it, maybe it was because I'm such a huge Beatles and Queen fan. I just saw it as, not to sound too pretentious with it, I just see it as music, and do I like it or not? I'd never really, put it in genres. I was just like, that's Queen. Sounds like Queen. Yet they run the gamut with how many different styles. Same with the Beatles. It always sounded like the Beatles, no matter what genre they were playing in. And I think I've kind of continued that. I'm just like, I think I've been very fortunate in the sense that I just grew up in a household where there were lots of different kind of music. Like I grew up with my grandparents' music, listening to like rock and roll and country, rockabilly kind of stuff. And just through teaching guitar as well, it's amazing how many people go, well, I want to learn how to play folk guitar. Then I get into loads of folk guitar players through teaching these students, like musicians I would never have heard of had I not taught this particular student. And I go, so that makes me a better guitar player, but it also broadens my horizons further. Instead of just listening to the stuff that is like really, really well known in that genre, you get a lot of students who are like, no, this is like not as well-known band, but listen to this, and it's like, oh, that's amazing. So I kind of listen to a little bit of everything. I mean, at the moment, there seems to be a lot of cool rock and metal albums that have come out this year that I seem to be listening to a lot of. But I'm listening to all sorts. I still listen to a lot of musical theatre soundtracks and film soundtracks and all kinds of stuff, classical music and opera and just basically whatever takes my fancy at the time when I go, okay, I've overdone it on the metal. Let's do something else for a while. But right now I'm in a rock and metal binge purely because there's been so many amazing rock and metal albums that have come out this year.
It's pretty exciting and gratifying considering like it was especially in the States. I know it stayed alive in Europe, but metal kind of took a nosedive, in popularity and just sort of suffered. Like metal musicians suffered for it. So I'm glad that it's back. And so many classic metal bands and like all the thrash bands and tons of different metal bands are arguably at the top of their game in their 40s and 50s, which is unheard of. I mean,
yeah, I think that's incredible. Like a lot of those legacy bands are actually churning out incredible albums. Yeah. I don't know if it's purely down to lockdown or what. Something happened where all these bands are going, well, we can't tour, so let's now release some of the greatest albums of our entire history. It just seems like one band after another. It's like, this is incredible. Like even bands that their popularity waned, now all of a sudden they're coming out with their greatest albums like since the 80s or whatever. You're like, this is pretty cool. Like, so I'm not all saying of the Bay Area bands, but it just seems to be a very planets aligning kind of thing.
All the Bay Area bands are, I think, releasing their best shit. It's great.
Yeah. I listened to the latest Exodus album when it came out, and I was like, this is awesome. Like not that Exodus have never not been awesome, but you're just there going, this is Exodus in 2022, you know what I mean? Like, and they're firing on all cylinders, and it almost seems like every band like that I like is doing that. It's crazy. Like I know like the latest Slipknot album and the latest Alter Bridge album, I really, really like them, and it's just like bands are taking chances with their music and it's paying off, or they're doing the same thing that they were doing for years. It just so happens it's one hell of a good album, you know? It's a really good year for music, I think.
Yeah. Last question, I think, because we got to wrap it up. I try to keep these around an hour and a half. For me, because I'm like a meat and potatoes guy, I'm like, I've got a major and a minor pentatonic pretty good, and I can do a couple of variations on different minor scales. So, and if another guitar player does that, I'm like, okay, we're on the same level. That's fine. You're cool. I'm not putting you on a pedestal. But if someone can do something that is like more sophisticated than that, I'm always impressed. But the thing that I measure guitar players by, strangely, is their Travis picking. Like if someone can Travis pick really well, I'm just like, this person is a wizard. I'm throwing roses at their feet.
Yeah.
I love this. Because I sought out a guitar teacher and tried to learn how to Travis pick, and I just it was like dancing. I've got like 2 left thumbs, right? So I just can't get good at it. So when I see someone do it, I'm like, wow, this person is amazing. Is there any particular style of guitar that you feel challenged by and that you put people on a pedestal when they excel at it?
Oh, that's a really difficult one to answer, because I feel like right now, especially where I am in my life, there's almost 2 schools of thought with that. Because I've been teaching some polyphia to a student of mine, and thankfully he's downloaded all the official tabs and everything and just sends them to me ahead of time. And I'm like, oh my Lord, I don't know how the hell I'm going to get through like even like 2 bars of this, let alone a whole song. But he's asking me more like the approach from a technique point of view and how are they doing it. It's like, okay, I get how they're doing it, I just can't physically do it. So that's kind of where I help him with it. I can show you a very slow version of it. And it's all obviously because it's all kind of hybrid picked and all this kind of stuff. So he's come for me for the hybrid picking side of things. So that from a technical point of view, I find is out of this world. I really do. Like, I'm trying to get my head around it, even when I'm looking at a tab going, okay, I get it, but how do they play it that fast and that clean? And it's incredible. But I'm the same as you in the sense that like Travis picking and hybrid picking is even though I do it, I think the people who are the true greats at it, it's like a different instrument. And I'm still striving for that. So there is, from a technical point of view, there's kind of 2 schools of thought, where there's like the new prog metal guys, or just the prog guys who are coming out with some incredibly technical stuff. Then there's the old school stuff, like even like a lot of classical and flamenco players and the rockabilly guys who are doing some crazy stuff where you go, as a rock blues metal guitar player, that's alien, but it sounds amazing. And I borrow elements. But then there's also the other side of things, and this has always bewildered me. But I'm a huge Pink Floyd fan, where you just go, okay, how do I make that one note sound as good as David Gilmour? So it's like the complete opposite end, and that's something I've always strived for with my own playing as well. I need that balance for technical, like how do I get the technical stuff good and up to speed and all this kind of stuff. But it's like, but when I land on that one magic note, 1, what is that magic note? And 2, how do I make it sound that good? It's like Brian May is still, to me, the greatest guitar player that ever lived. Exactly.
He never overplays. Like,
I mean, being a huge B.B. King fan. Yeah. Like, B.B. King was the guy for me as well. When I got into B.B. King, it was like, again, it's stereotypical to say, but one note. You know it's B.B. King with one note.
Yeah.
Like, how do you get to that level of player? It's got nothing to do with technique. Well, I suppose it has. You've got to have a certain degree of technique to make that one note sound good enough. But that's the stuff that gets me. I kind of live in this weird chasm between super, super technical and how do you make one note sound incredible. And I have the utmost respect for both of them on an equal level. And I don't know how people do it either side of that. Everything in the middle, where I think I live, I still have the utmost respect for it, because everybody has their own unique twist on it.
Of course.
Like I get students ask me, like, what do you think to this player, even though I'm a technically more advanced player than that player? I'm like, that's got nothing to do with it. How do they get it to sound like that? How do you play with that much ferocity? Like, it's a whole different way of attacking the strings that I don't do, and I can't sound like that. Like, even Kurt Cobain is a very difficult guitar player to sound like, because he attacked the strings in a way that I've tried to spend the last 25 years perfecting, and it still doesn't sound right. So, you know, it's I respect everybody at every level, regardless of their technique and ability.
That's because you're specifically trying to play notes that he accidentally played.
Yeah. If you ever look at tabs of, there are some brilliant tabs out there, and I've tried to make them as well with my teaching stuff, where you go, right, okay, here's how you play heart-shaped box. And then you're transcribing it going, the hell? Like, because it's all the accidental notes that he played just from sheer reckless abandon.
Right.
But if they're not in there, it sounds
Doesn't
wrong.
sound like the song.
But if I try and play them on purpose, it sounds weird. Like, I was teaching The Unforgiven, the solo for Unforgiven by Metallica, and there are some times where he accidentally plays an open string. If you do it on purpose, it sounds awful. If you don't put it in, it sounds weird.
Right.
And it's like, so that's like a new level of guitar playing where it's like, yes, I can play this solo, but to play it with the same vibe and style as the guys who wrote it that's a lifetime's worth of study in itself. Like, how
Kirk
do you
Hammett
sound
is
like
an
Brian
interesting
May?
guitar
Nobody
player
can.
because I don't think that technically he's fantastic, but he's the lead guitar player in Metallica, and he's a huge influence on me. And
Yeah.
maybe, you know, like he's probably a bigger influence on like my actual technique than I would like, you know, because I spent time as a kid like so deep down that rabbit hole. I wish I could shake some of that off, because, like, you know, there are elements of his vibrato style that is still with me that I'm constantly trying to shake off. I'm like, that's a little too excited. I want to get rid of that, you know?
Funnily enough, I had that happen when I was at university. There was a lesson I had. I think I've said this on a podcast before, but there was one teacher who like asked me to like stand up in front of a class and play a solo. But I'd learned, like, we'd all learned this solo. He's like, right, can I hear your take on it, Rich? Not a problem. And then he literally said, your vibrato is shit at the end of it. And I was like, what? He said, are you nervous? I was like, no, kind of young, naive, maybe a little bit cocky, going, because I've been playing in gigs since I was like 12, 13 years old. So I felt confident playing in front of people, but he's like, yeah, but your vibrato sounds like you're nervous. And I was trying to, my vibrato, I was based it all off Kirk Hammett.
Is that right?
And then he was like, cool, stay after class. Yeah, my original vibrato, because Kirk was my hero. So I sounded like I had Kirk's vibrato. And he said, you're quite clearly not a Metallica fan. He was like, your vibrato is awful. Basically stay after class and I'll show you some tips. And then it was the best lesson ever, because he showed, right, this is what you should be trying to do with your vibrato.
Right.
And still to this day, not to sound, hopefully I don't sound too pretentious, I'm really proud of my vibrato. And that was thanks to that teacher who was just like, if you really kind of spent some time working on your vibrato, you'd be really good. And
I swore that I only had one more question, but here's the actual last question. So when
I'm good for a while, so yeah, keep going for it.
When I realized, like, okay, this is something I need to work on, and I've mostly failed, but I've done okay at working on it. I dove into Peter Green and mostly a lot of Peter Green, and this was like 1998 is when I sort of really found that era of Fleetwood Mac. Was there a person that you sort of like went into, you're like, okay, this is my benchmark vibrato? Is there a person for you like that?
That's really difficult, because my vibrato comes from so many different sources. Like, I actually have 3 different kinds of vibrato. If I really analyze it, depending on what I'm playing, I've used 3 different kinds of vibrato. And there's the traditional, I think Clapton, weirdly enough, was a big, I have Clapton's vibrato where he takes the thumb off and like does that.
Yeah.
I never realised, because I'm not the biggest Clapton fan, but I never realised how much of an influence on my vibrato he was. Maybe because one of the guitar teachers that I had in my early days just made me learn loads of Clapton. So it was like, this is how you do it. And it wasn't until, so I was still learning the Kirk vibrato while learning the Clapton vibrato, but then I learned the kind of like more traditional vibrato as well. So it kind of like those kind of three things. It's less of the Kirk shaky vibrato now. But I think if I really boil it down, it was obviously I was always a Queen fan, but when I got into playing guitar and learning the Queen songs, it was like, okay, this vibrato thing's legit. Like, if I can get Brian May's vibrato, that would be amazing. And then later, when I got into Pink Floyd, so I think it was more because I got into people like Vai and Petrucci and Betancourt and all these guys. Oh, hello.
That's Mr. Big.
Ah, Mr. Big. What a great name. But yeah, so ironically, Paul Gilbert. Like, I got into these guys with their traditional, like, kind of more rock vibrato kind of stuff, so I kind of honed that. But it was always Brian May and David Gilmour where I was like, this is the epitome for me of vibrato. And then ironically came back to the blues stuff, and it was like the B.B. Kings of the world that kind of made me go, this vibrato stuff is stuff I really need to. If I can almost like play the kind of technical stuff that I really wanted to play, but with the vibrato of these giants of guitar and guitar vibrato, I'll be a happy man. And it's still something to this day where I'm always very aware of my vibrato.
If you could only listen to one guitar player for the rest of your life, who would that be?
Oh, don't do that to me. Oh my God.
I know. Last question.
It always comes back to Brian May for me.
Yeah.
Always. I've got this huge list of like because I respect so many guitar players, and then you've got the ones that are incredible guitar players, but then they're the ones that mean the most to you, that go up a notch, and then you've got the real kings, and then there's Brian May. But it always comes back to Brian May for me. Kind of
it's interesting because so much of Queen's music has a theatrical vibe. Like, it's not, the way the songs move is like musical theater in much of it. But then there's also very metallic, some of the early stuff is very heavy.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And this is the thing. For me, that's why Queen were the perfect band, because they just ran the gamut of what you could do from a song, not only from a songwriting point of view, but from a guitar point of view.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing when kids say, I don't get the whole Hendrix thing. Like Hendrix to me was incredible. Without these guys, we wouldn't be doing it. And yes, there are people who are technically more impressive than these people, but there's only so many guitar players on the earth you can tell who they are from one note, which I know it's the whole one note debate. This has been going on in the guitar community forever. Sure. But I get more excited by those players where you go, that's one note is incredible, but it's also what they do after that one note that is going to hold my attention.
Right.
So there's a certain degree of technique that's needed, but it doesn't need to be like Petrucci level to get me excited,
I think if I could only listen to one guitar player solo, it would be Frank Zappa for me.
Oh yeah. See, Frank's another one for me. It's like one note, and it's Frank.
And
he's another one of those guys.
It's the note, and it's the tones that he was like. It's so rude sounding and weird. And if you listen to it on its own, it would be like, I use the fish sauce analogy. Like, you got to have some fish sauce and a green curry, right? But if you just taste the fish sauce, oof. But even some Brian May guitar tones are weird and probably
they're awful
on their own. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's that balance where, and even the better a musician I become, and hopefully a better songwriter I become, a guitar player I become, I find I have even more respect for these guys, because it's like, yes, I can play this stuff, but how the hell did they write it? How did they think to use this guitar tone? that guitar tone is horrendous. I think this when I listen to Zeppelin. You hear, I'm really geeky and I go online and listen to like the isolated tracks of some of my favorite bands.
Oh, sure.
You're like, that guitar tone is horrendous.
Yeah, man.
But oh my God, it sounds incredible when you put it with the other musicians. And it's like, how did they know that guitar tone would work with the bass and the drums? How does it not get in the way of the vocal? But on its own, it's awful. And
yeah,
I just have even more respect for these artists, especially the ones that were doing it first. You know, like how did Queen think, oh, we'll just, you know, how are we going to get these harmonies? Well, how about we have three of us sing the same part and then we'll layer up the next part and the next part and the next part. That's not how it's done. Yet that's the sound of Queen's vocal harmonies. How do they think to do that?
That's why this whole like pursuit of perfect tone stuff, like, oh, you got to have this amp, you got to have this, that, and the other. And in the studio, no, you don't. I mean, you could probably get away unless you're doing, you know, you need a 5150 or some other super tight high gain metal amp. Like, so many of my favorite guitar tracks were done with a Champ, you know, and it's like, it's got an 8-inch speaker.
Yeah, it's when you find out what they were actually using. It's like the whole Tom Morello thing. Tom Morello's only ever really used the same rig. Right. He's like, whatever he could afford at the time was the rig he still uses. Right. And I'm sure he could play in front of anything. And he's got all of his toys and his amps and his guitars and everything. But I would be willing to bet that if he played through anyone else's rig, he'd still sound like Tom Morello.
Of course.
And I've been lucky enough, I've played through a replica of some of my favorite guitarists' rigs. There was like one guitar show I went to where they had like a replica of Brian May's rig. They had a red special and a treble booster and like the wall of AC30s. And I was incredibly saddened to find out I sounded like me. I didn't sound like Brian May. I sounded like me, which in hindsight is a great thing. I think it is a good thing to sound like me, whatever sounding like me is, because I still don't think I have a unique, identifiable tone that I'm aiming for. I just play for whatever's needed of me at that point in time. You know, I have a certain thing I do that was for Cradle, a certain thing I did for King, a certain thing I do even for musical theatre or whatever. I wear these different hats. Yet these guys who sound truly like themselves, and when I do play in front of people's rigs and I sound like myself, I used to get disheartened about it, and now I actually quite like it. It's like, well, that means I've got something to offer. That's my own unique voice, you know? And I think it's incredible that those are the true great guitar players are the ones who have a voice, no matter how technical they are. You know it's them straight off the bat. And that's hard. That's hard to do. Even with all the guitar tones that are available to us in the world, it's amazing how few guitar players get to that level.
Right.
Kind of weird when I think about it. I'm not going to think about it too much because it kind of freaks me out.
I've had a really great time hanging out with you. This is awesome. I wish that we were traveling closer to you in the UK, but I think once again London is the closest I'm going to be. Yeah, that's hours away.
It's not too far. London. I've moved down south to be with my girlfriend's family, be close to my girlfriend's family. So we're not too far from London now, but it's still a bit of a trek. But it's not too far. It's way closer than it used to be.
Right.
But we'll see what we can do. We'll have to hook up at some point.
Catalyst will be there. You could meet him.
That'd be cool. I'd just like to say hello. I'd just like to say hello to Chris and just, I mean, don't get me wrong. Like I said, Ghost would be like the dream gig for me. But I'm not going to steal it off anybody. I'm not going to be that guy. I will always be a fan first. But if they called me up and said, how about it? I'd be like, it wouldn't take me long to decide. Let's
be there tomorrow.
Way. Yeah. It's like, I already know the songs. I'm on my way.
I'm always halfway out the door on my way.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Let's see. Do you, Do you have any promotional shots that you could send my way that I could use to edit into some?
I'm sure I could find some. Yeah.
I don't know how you feel about using outdated. It's funny, as that came out of my mouth, I'm like, you probably don't want to use a shot from Cradle.
Yeah. I mean, it's not that I don't want to, but I think there are a couple of ones that are good that are me out of makeup that we seem to have. That I'll send them your way.
I'd love that. Yeah, great. And then, would you mind? I do a guest playlist every week. So the week that this episode comes out,
Mm-hmm.
I put up a Spotify playlist. It's 13 songs. You choose any 13 songs. The only thing is one song that you've performed on.
Okay.
And the rest, there's no rules. Could be your favorite songs, could be songs you're listening to now, could be, doesn't matter. Your choice.
Sweet. I'll have a think about it and get back to you on that, because
all right. And
it's going to be hard to whittle it down to
like
13.
I said, I'm going to push stop now, just so that